So in order to have an introduction for you, well, we know climate change is an intergenerational issue. So we have immediate impacts as well, like physical harms, like water scarcity, drought, floods, and other diseases. But also we have other long-term impacts, and we know about this kind of continuing more frequent immediate impacts, as well as migration, humanitarian emergencies, issues as well in the loss of the capacity of the land to to generate, and these will obviously have like these intergenerational impacts, as I mentioned, kind of this loss of the natural resources, inequity, and perpetual cycles of poverty. Next, please. So this brings us also to understand that 99% of the children on Earth are exposed to at least one of these climate and environmental hazards, shocks, or stresses. So basically, we know that, well, this is a very interesting data. It is from the Children's Climate Risk Index. So we see in the map, like the darker colors, we see this, like the severity and the impacts are very high. So 33 countries are at an extremely high risk of those impacts of climate change. So this brings us why we should care about the NDCs. But what are the NDCs? So the NDCs are like a national climate plan. Those are the commitments made by the countries that sign and agree to the Paris Agreement. So each country, they set kind of their action in the different sectors, agriculture, energy, industry, in order to mitigate, obviously, to cut those carbon emissions, but as well to adapt to the existing climate change. And they are reviewed, and this is around every 5 years. So they are the profile of this national climate action plan for every country. And why are they so important? Well, for policymakers, they set these clear targets they need to follow, but also for us, for advocacy. Analyzing those NDCs will help us to understand what our country is doing well, what it can be doing better, and how we can also get involved as vigilant, not just observing, but also to get involved because of this intergenerational justice. Next, please. So the research I'm going to present you, it is an analysis of 49 indicators of each country. So they were looking for reference of children, youth, action for climate empowerment commitments, and there were 4 indicators considered whenever we talk that an NDC can be considered child sensitive. So reference is to mention explicitly and meaningfully the reference of children and youth in the NDCs. Right-based will be considered us right holders, meaningful references, and to talk a little bit about intergenerational justice and equity. As well, holistic and multi-sectoral. These addresses basically a specific risk and vulnerability, including child sensitive and other multi-sectoral commitments. So it's more like an action plan. And then inclusive. If youth, children that were taken into account during the participative methodologies to develop the NDCs, if they were involved in all the consultation process. So these 4 kind of indicators and references make an NDC child and youth inclusive. So we're gonna see some examples. Next, please. All right, so this is kind of basically we're gonna see some colors in one of the slides that represent this. So completely child sensitive is that it includes all these kind of 4 references, and no child sensitive will be all the opposite. Next, please. So the research actually found that the new updated NDCs, just 34% of them are considered child sensitive. So that means only a third of the 103 submitted and analyzed NDCs kind of recognize us, include us, and make us part of their plans in a holistic way. which is a worrying number, just 34%. Next, please. So there are, so this is a map of the countries identified in the study having these child-sensitive NDCs or youth-sensitive NDCs. So the ones in green are the ones kind of that outstand. The ones in gray, they have some indicators, and the ones in white color, that means we still don't have the data, or the data haven't been analyzed. And yes, there is a document regarding this. You just need to Ecosia or Google, whatever, NDC Unicef research. And you're gonna have this in several languages translated. It's a PDF open with all the methodology, with more kind of the explanation of this findings, so you can just find it. And I think we can also share these slides as well. Next, please. So this is kind of a snapshot from those from that research. So we see there is kind of a huge difference as well in the words of youth and children inclusivity from the first NDCs to the second NDCs. We see that from 42% it went to 72%. Other kind of interesting points as well is like the rights approach. So just 39% consider, you know, like climate change as a human right for children and youth. And sorry, for youth actually, and 19 just recognizes that it's a children right. So this is basically kind of a perspective on, and another aspect that I love to mention is the inclusivity in the planning process. So just 12% of those NDCs mention that the process involves children, and 40% that they involve youth. So let's remember that we are the ones who are going to put this NDCs in practice, that we are being affected. So it's fundamental as well to request to see the data from your country and to see how the government plans to include us. Next, please. So those are some other indicators, commitments, and targets that are actually lacking. So is again regarding this youth and children sensitive. So we see kind of the percentage and the relationship with the different sectors. So we see some sectors that kind of involve more or mention more kind of youth. In this case, we see kind of the case of energy, as well health, integrating as well with, for example, with the national information systems and the health management information systems. And we see as well water, disaster risk reduction, but we have obviously like you see in the upper part kind of the overall commitment of the country, and underneath you'll see kind of this youth commitments, if they are actually mentioning youth and children. Next, please. And I'll promise I'll read your comments on the chat. So yeah, so basically 73% of these commitments, indicators or targets, they relate to one of these ACE component. Just 73%, and at least kind of one of these components. So we have education, training, public awareness, participation, public access information, international cooperation. So we still see that, you know, there is not just a long way to go, but there are different aspects that that the countries are being considering when they try to include just youth. It's not just about mentioning them, but empowering them, educating them. Next, please. I think we have, oh yeah, well, this is kind of from my region, from Latin America and the Caribbean. So we have some examples of how they are being analyzed. So you have kind of the different 4 criterias. And for example, we're gonna see the case of Saint Lucia and how it's kind of a holistic approach. In the case, for example, of the country I'm working on Paraguay, we see in yellow color, that means it makes references of youth and children in the NDCs. However, it doesn't recognize them as a rights holder. and it was an inclusive during the process of the consultation. So that's what we're trying to change. We're trying to change the methodology and the way how youth will be consulted and as well involved in the development of the next NDCs. And for this, a great partner has been Unicef, in order to support the youth movements as well, to sit at the table with the negotiators, because there is, you know, a kind of a long way sometimes for youth organizations to start knocking the doors with governments, and it's very bureaucratic. So sometimes taking, you know, support from other organizations, in this case, as I said, Unicef can help leveraging and catalyzing this process. Next, please. So this is the case of San Lucia, and we see it's being considered a holistic NDCs regarding youth and children inclusivity. So we see that they were consulted during the decision-making processes to develop the NDCs. They were having also equal access to climate education, even for youth and children with disability. And the young people's rights were affirmed during the NDCs as well, and they make like a specific references of the United Nations Conventions on Rights of Children, but also young people's concerns that were reflected in the different sectorial commitments, especially in the energy sector, social protection as well, and the engagement, so that they were presenting some youth and children's work in schools, gardening programs, community groups to support these NDCs and to reduce their food insecurity. So I recommend you to take a look of Santa Lucia's updated NDCs for you as well, to have a references and to have kind of a perspective. Maybe, and sometimes by examples, I think it's sometimes easier kind of to understand maybe what my country can do better, what I can support as well my country in order to do better. Next, please. So this is the document I was telling you about. This is an open resource, really easy to access. So there were 135 countries analyzed. So the idea is that the team is, they are working in expanding this analysis to all countries. There is also data partnership with the Climate Watch, and UNICEF will be hosting as well a platform about this. And they are developing a pilot program with 5 or 6 countries. And one of part of those countries where they have set climate consultants in order to do direct advocacy to NDCs. So we are some countries like Paraguay, Nepal, Belarus, India, Lebanon, and I know that the second tranche will be, there are some Middle East countries, and they will be expanding as well this kind of this youth program in order to have a young person supporting youth organizations in NDCs advocacy. Next, please. So this is kind of at the end, actually, sorry, this slide was meant to be at the end. I want you to start thinking how you can utilize this data for your country's NDCs, how from your school, university, work, either if you are not, or just start getting involved into climate action, how do you think you can actually use this information in order to talk to the government? Hey, we're here, we see this data, what we can do better? That's kind of a question I leave for you. But I also want to show you some kind of other resources. Next, please. That are kind of useful as well. So there are some ways that, you know, like this work can also support, and is, you know, like empowering children and youth in climate processes. I think that whenever we have data, whenever we have information, it's just a step towards public policies, towards advocacy. In order to giving percentage and talking in this way with policymakers, it makes like a big difference. As well, as I said, like I have realized, especially the work I have done kind of with youth and children, that yeah, we can achieve these laws. We can also request and analyze the budgets, and I'll also include children and young people's perspective in climate action. But also it's fundamental to kind of incorporate, right, our views in these policy making processes. But we also need kind of this, support as well in order to do this implementation. So sometimes, for example, in the case of Paraguay, several years ago, I went to talk to them regarding the adaptation plan. Our country is suffering a lot from the increase of temperature. We had a winter where we got up to 39 Celsius degrees temperatures, and on summer it gets until 44, 43 Celsius degrees in the capital, in Asunción. This is unlivable. So, like, people like me, we don't have like cars, we use public transportation. This is just not possible. So I remember I went to talk to them very worried, and they said, look, we just have some few people in the office, but youth are kind of the legs and the arms where we can reach. So we can train you in order kind of to advocate in the local adaptation plans. And that's how also like advocacy can start, like not just, we say in Spanish, desde la protesta a la propuesta, from the protest to the proposal. And as well, as I said, like request or maybe enter in contact with like different government organizations or United Nations organizations in order to support them developing some data and modeling regarding NDCs in youth. Next, please. And yeah, I think those are kind of more kind of governmental recommendations that we have, that is not just to integrate the youth in the policy and the strategies, but also like really making, programs that they don't degrade our environment, just for a kind of intergenerational justice perspective. But at the same time, support us with education, development of green skills, something that is fundamental. We know that adaptation, like investing in climate adaptation, just for example, in Latin America, will allow 50 million green jobs by 2050. So it is also thinking in the future, but also like thinking and in a way also in how to tackle this disaster risk reduction and elevate, well, the voices of youth in the different platforms or United Nations summits. Next, please. And yeah, kind of this is what I wanted to leave you. So Unicef has very interesting materials. The first one is a toolkit for young climate activists. So there are like 5 books about like Paris Agreement, Escazú Agreement, tools for climate action, glossary for climate activists. They're in different languages. You can access them online. Also, there is a project that is called the U Report. So the U Report is actually a chat bot that is developer country, and there is like a research. For example, in Paraguay, we started developing a research regarding climate anxiety, because we realized there is a huge correlation as well in adaptation and climate anxiety. So use this U Report, get contact with your local office and ask them how you can use these platforms in order to leverage youth research as well. And there are other very interesting, like the Learning for Climate Adaptation. So this is kind of an online climate platform with courses and so. And the world's largest lesson in climate resources. Those are kind of some kind of websites and some videos with interactive quizzes. And also, like, as I said, like, if you want to get more involved, get in contact with your country office and ask them as well to develop a training for advocacy and for the advocates. But at the same time, I also wanted to tell you that Unicef in New York at the offices of ADAPT is working in a training regarding youth climate activists, but regarding the advocacy in these policies. So this will be soon available online. It's a peer-to-peer training as well. So I think that now that I have contact with you guys, with the NDCs group, I think I can send you the updates. And yeah, please, I think we can share maybe this presentation for you to take a look of all these toolkits and materials. I think there is one more slide, if I'm not wrong. Oh yeah, well, this is the part kind of open discussion. I just wanted to hear, like, we have kind of some specific questions. Yes, the material will be shared. And also I will leave my contact in the chat in case you want to talk, and maybe we can see how maybe by an email or something, I can get you in contact as well with your UNICEF's country office, and maybe you can have a meeting with them and start the action. So, well, Aguille, thank you very much for your attention. And I look forward as well to more interaction in the future. And yeah, please feel free to share these slides, dear organization team.
Thank you so much. That was great, Joyce. Thanks for your insightful presentation. And to address a couple of generic questions from the people who have joined and people who have been attending and listening to Joyce earlier on. Yes, we will be sharing the presentation slides. As she said, she's okay with that. And also the recordings after the webinar has been completed. We see a lot of people have just come in, and you might have missed some important things that Joyce might have said. So just to give you a short summary on some key takeaway points, of course, importance of NDC, nationally determined contributions, and why it is important for policymakers. And being somebody in the policymaking sector myself, I absolutely understand why NDCs are important. The importance of youth is, of course, it's good that because all the policies that are being made right now will be implemented in the future, that means it is for our own future. So importance of youth is very, very, very crucial. And of course, it is important to be very inclusive, no matter what background you come from, because it's not about any particular religion or caste or country or area. It's about youth in general. And of course, UNICEF has an amazing toolkit, which you can find on the website, and also more details will be found on the last slide of this presentation, which we will be sharing later on. So anybody having any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat, or we have a couple of minutes before Joyce has to leave us.
Sorry, it's just crazy, but yeah, in case, maybe also because sometimes it happens, you don't have like a question now, maybe try to check about this report. I guess they are like more like around 10 pages. Try to read it, and in case if you have any specific question, I can enter in contact with the NDCs team, and also I can like link you with your local office as well.
Thanks, Joyce. So we have some couple of questions coming in. Lam Chichi asks, why do you think that most countries who have incorporated child-sensitive NDCs are from the global South countries?
That's such a good question. I was actually wondering that, because kind of I was taking a look, especially kind of for the Latin American region, and I see that there is for example, in my region, there is a correlationship regarding the percentage of the young population. For example, for Paraguay, 50% of the population is younger than 30 years old. So this is completely related kind of with the national kind of plan for development, which is this training, inclusion of youth, green skills, in order to as well overcome kind of the struggles we have with COVID. Because especially kind of several global South countries, we were left with high rates of unemployment. Besides that, a lot of like social security like issues. So I think that like these countries have realized as well that climate change is putting a higher pressure into the issues that the countries already have. So including youth is just a great idea as well economically for them. And I'm obviously I hope it's not just seen under this perspective, but it's completely for me related as well, kind of with this inclusion and how to put this new generation in the track for the goals, because it's already worrying. Some of our regions, for example, where I'm talking to you, some people are planning to leave 3 months the country during summer. This is not feasible for everybody, and migration will start as well. So it's a little bit worried this part.
Lovely, great. I hope that answers your question, Lam. We have one more question that says, how much of the human rights laws are highlighted in regards to UNICEF? I think
yeah. So there are very interesting. Maybe for another meeting we can have as well. There is this kind of International Declaration of Youth, Children, and Climate Change, and it's like it starts kind of with human rights, like the foundation. For all kind of for this declaration, and it's being kind of like allowed as well. Like obviously it started with youth. It's YOUNGO was promoting at Unicef and another center for children's rights, and it's being acknowledged by several countries. So this is another point. It will be interesting to see if your country, sorry for the noise, if your country is acknowledging this declaration, because it's like a standpoint saying, okay, we care about youth and children. We want to include and we recognize the relationship with their rights and climate change issues. So please take a look at this declaration. It was launched in the COP that took place in Madrid, in Spain. So I think this will give you kind of an overall where your country stands from, but there is a lot work based on human rights. I can tell you this from the perspective. We can have another presentation with this actually. There is kind of every kind of article for the youth and children human rights and relationship with climate change. We also have these materials, or we can enter in contact as well. No problem. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. We have two more questions. I think they are kind of merged together. So one says, how can youth be supported directly to implement children and youth issues? And the second part of it says, how can we work to analyze child right or any issues related to climate and link NDCs to report to that of the country? So I think it's
Sure, yeah.
youth and children, yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of have mentioned in how like obviously like first we can like get well it's such a long question. So first, yeah, how like analyzing obviously like these links and the links as well kind of with climate change is a little bit explored in the report. However, the realities from the different countries as well, they change. So I will ask you to kind of check the report. I believe there will be, for example, in my case, in order to answer this question locally, I contact the office of UNICEF, and I know they do develop research on NDCs and youth. So maybe your country office has kind of this report of your own country, because there is a lot of work with UNICEF and for example, in the NDCs and so maybe they already have kind of a deeper analyze and report how this is involved. And the second part was it? Sorry, can you repeat it?
Yeah, so it says, how can we work to analyze child right or any issue related to climate to link NDC's report of other countries?
Well, that's kind of the one I try as well to kind of to answer, but there was a previous one about this. There were like two questions on one, or that was it, or there is another one.
Yeah, those were like two questions related to child right issues. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one person says, what are the country's eligibility criteria for NDC engagement?
Oh, you mean like for the program? Because I talked a little bit about this program. Yeah. So I think some of the criteria was kind of first kind of some countries that express interest to the office to New York in order to develop this. Second, it was some offices that they don't have a lot of financing. Like for example, the case of Paraguay is like a very small office and there is just one person in climate change. So what also it's interesting is that some of these countries are also very vulnerable. So they will be opening kind of different kind of classes, let's say, of consultants. And the idea is to take this type of consultancy on NDC engagement and climate advocacy in a lot of countries. So just keep your eyes open, because YOUNGO has been a great partner, and that's how as well like the young consultants were selected through YOUNGO database to their work. So being here doing this volunteering is worth it. I also got contacted by YOUNGO by representing as well my country. So that's how like they're being selecting as well these youth consultants. But yeah, please, if you have kind of very specific questions, email me and I can also make contact, as I said, with the different offices I have mentioned. And this is team. New York office, the one that is like leading this process, and your country office, guys. That's kind of what I can say at the moment.
Thanks so much, Joyce. We just have one more question that has come in. So NDC reports are prepared by the government official itself, so there might be some malpractice data given by the parties. How can we overcome it? I think that's a little generic question.
So
again.
yeah, but like I think there is this part of transparency as well. There is because sometimes we see some countries. I don't want to mention exactly which countries, but I'm thinking in my region, they agree and sign the Paris Agreement, but then we see the local plans and the reality of the application of the NDCs, they are really far away. Well, I'm gonna mention because I used to live there, and for example, the case of Brazil. You know, I grew up in Brazil, so it signs the Paris Agreement and everything, but then we see at the local level, it's being kind of, we have like human rights issues as well, and like even genocides happening with indigenous peoples. So like, obviously, like the data is produced by the Ministry of Climate Change or Ministry of Environment, and it's kind of validated through kind of the reports and the statistics on emissions. But this is done, as I said, like these updates takes like 5 years. So you can do this mapping in 5 years. So it's like based on kind of statistics and everything. But I know that there are kind of ways in how to develop these NDCs, and there are kind of some, how can I say, kind of metrics for the countries in how to produce to provide data. But as I said, sometimes we have seen that obviously the reality is one, the commitment is other one. That's why there is a lot of work in mapping and youth being like vigilant, like we mapping, hey, 5 years ago, the government committed to this, and 5 years after is this. Those things are very important because sometimes civil society on other sectors, they don't have the time, or sometimes, you know, they don't understand as well kind of the importance in the relationship. But I think that our role is not just vigilant, but also like monitoring. This monitoring is fundamental because we are the ones who know if that's the reality. You know, like sometimes it's difficult. They're in the COP, amazing commitments. But back home, we are the ones that we are locally. We realize. So yeah. So I just wanted, I will have to leave now, but please message me and knock on the doors of UNICEF. Is a good partner. Is there like work there to be supporting youth, and especially youth, and climate change is just an important topic at the moment, and situation as well.
Thanks, Joyce. Before you leave, I would like to just take a picture with everyone. Those who can have their cameras on, great. So we'll just, because
please.
we don't want to keep Joyce for long. Shreya, would you mind clicking a picture?
Yeah. Okay, 1 more minute. Ready? So, okay, 1, 2, 3, go. Just give me 1 more minute.
Thank you, guys, and please reach out. Okay, I left you my email. The guys have like my communication, and it was such a great like opportunity to talk to you.
Thanks so much, Joyce. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. So anybody, I saw a couple of more questions coming in, but sorry, we'll have to move on to our next speaker. If you have any questions, like Joyce said, she has put in her email ID in the chat. Feel free to reach out to her or us directly or indirectly, whatever suits you. Moving on to our second speaker, Qasim Tuer. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Thank you so much for your time today. And Qasim is an environmentalist and a climate. I'm sorry, I think I've got unmuted. Is an environmentalist and a climate change activist with a decade of experience working with the youth and local communities to address climate change and biodiversity loss. Mr. Qasim is the founder of and the executive director of Greener Impact International, a Ghanaian-based NGO with observer status with the UNFCCC. He is actively engaged in the international climate change negotiation process, and he's currently as a negotiator with the African Group of Negotiators on Climate Change, AGN, on mitigation-related items. Welcome, Qasim. I'm just going to hand it over to you right now.
Thank you very much. Just microphone check. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, okay, great. So thank you very much, Shraddha. First of all, let me thank the NDC working group of YOUNGO for convening this important session. For me, I have been part of YOUNGO for a long time, and at a particular point in time, I was also a member of the BLT. So having sessions like this is like coming back home to discuss and also to share some of the important information that is relevant for young people's active engagement in the UNFCCC processes. Again, I would like to also thank the earlier speaker, Joyce, who has articulated very important point related to how young people have to be considered in the international climate change and environmental movements. I think it's very important we are having this discussion. And there is one thing I think I have picked from Joyce's presentation, especially from the concluding part, where she mentioned about the need for civil society organizations to hold our leaders in check so that they would always commit to whatever they sign onto at the international level. And on this note, I'm going on building capacity, because I have realized, I mean, throughout my participation in the climate change processes, I have realized that what actually keeps young people specifically from active engagement is because of the lack of capacity. When you go to the climate change process, I mean, even though it's very important that we as young to ambitions and all that, but it's important also for us to understand the technical elements and also be able to actively engage in the technical focus on building capacity, especially on mitigation related elements within the negotiations, and also focusing on the nationally determined contributions. So I've already, otherwise I can do that from here. Would you want me to share from here?
Yes, that would be.
Okay, okay, so that's great. Let me do that. Can you see my slides?
Not yet.
That's it, okay.
We can see it now.
Okay, great. So for my presentation, I would be, this is just the outline, just for the understanding of all of us. I'll be speaking a bit about the convention and then the Kyoto Protocol, because this is, I mean, we cannot talk about NDCs without actually looking at where NDCs came from. So the discussion, the earlier part of the discussion will put the discussion into perspective. So I'll talk about the convention and the Kyoto Protocol. I'll also be delving into the Paris Agreement and also talk about the NDCs. I'll highlight a bit of on the element of the NDCs. And also I would be sharing the journey from Paris to Glasgow, more or less to share with you about on the Paris rulebook and some of the guidelines that have been adopted so far related to NDC implementation. And I would also talk about the Glasgow Climate Pact and what is there for us to follow on as young people. Finally, I'll talk about the good practices and also some few tips on how young people can actively engage in the negotiation processes. So talk about the convention. I'm sure all of us are aware that the UNFCCC was adopted in 1992 and also came into force in 1994. And the objective of the convention, as we know, is to stabilize the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere at levels that will prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. And it is part of the objective that such levels should be achieved within a time frame sufficient to allow ecosystems to adapt naturally to climate change and to ensure that food production is not threatened and to allow economic growth to continue in a sustainable manner. So this is the convention, and beyond the convention, we have had so far the two agreements. We have had the Kyoto Protocol, which I'll talk about briefly, and then later the Paris Agreements. So at COP1, which is in 1991, we had the launch of the negotiations of the Kyoto Protocol. Apparently, when the convention was adopted, there should have, I mean, there was the need for an agreement to actually put into place or into practice what the convention actually took place. So the Kyoto Protocol, after negotiations, was adopted in 1997, and then it came into force in 2005. So as I mentioned, any legal instrument or agreement that is born out of the convention is supposed to be aligned with the principle of the convention. So Kyoto Protocol was also based on the principle of the convention, which is basically also, I mean, as part of the principle, there is this principle on common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. So which actually differentiates countries in terms of their capabilities in addressing climate change. So under the Kyoto Protocol, it was only developed countries that were signed to reduce emissions. And it was agreed that the developed countries, which were actually the emitters of greenhouse gases, were going to reduce their greenhouse emissions by an average of 5% below 1990 levels between 2008 and 2012. And this was referred to as the first commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol. But then in 2012, when the first commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol ended, there was the second commitment period, which was supposed to span from 2013 to 2020. And again, the second commitment period also engaged only the required only the developed country parties to reduce their emissions. The difference here with the second commitment period is that instead of the 5% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, the second commitment period required these parties or the developed countries to reduce their emissions by an average at least by 18% below 1990 levels. And this was supposed to span from 2013 to 2020. Now I'm going to talk about the failure of Kyoto Protocol and why the importance of the Paris Agreement. So the Kyoto Protocol, as we see, was considered as a top-down approach because more or less, I mean, these developed countries were asked, just even though, I mean, the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities provide a basis for them to actually take lead in addressing climate change. But it was seen as a top-down approach to addressing climate change. It did not really work well. What happened was that many of the countries were really relaxed instead of actually pushing forward to reduce their emissions. And in 2001, the United States quoted the exclusion of the developing countries for mitigation commitment as a key reason for its refusal, because we are aware that the US did not ratify the Kyoto Protocol, and they were of the argument that there are quite a number of developing countries that are also emitting, at a high level, so they should also be required to reduce their emissions. Basically, these countries include Brazil, the BRICS country, Brazil, India, China, and South Africa. So again, because of this argument, nearly 17 out of the 36 countries that ratified the Kyoto Protocol could not meet their targets. And so in view of this, the Paris Agreement adopted a bottom-up approach, allowing parties to set for themselves emissions reduction targets, taking into consideration their national circumstances. And this is referred to as the nationally determined contribution, which we'll be discussing today. So now let's look at the element of the nationally determined contributions. Maybe just a bit of history. The second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol was supposed to end in 2020. So the idea was that whilst this was ongoing, there was also a negotiation on how the new agreement will replace the second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol. And this new agreement is the Paris Agreement. And as I mentioned, this agreement adopted a bottom-up approach where parties were required to actually come up or assign themselves emissions reduction targets and follow up with actions to reduce their emissions. So I'm going to go through a bit of the elements of the Paris Agreement, especially articles that relate to the nationally determined contribution. So Article 4.2 is actually the article that calls on parties to submit their NDCs. So basically you can follow up. I don't want to waste so much time on this one, but you can follow up on the Paris Agreement and you can see some of this element that I'm sharing with you. So, and then we go to Article 4.3, where it states that each party's successive nationally determined contribution will represent a progression beyond the party's then current nationally determined contribution. We know that NDCs are submitted every 5 years. The first round of NDCs were submitted in 2015, and from 2015, and by 2020, the implementation of those NDCs began. And we have just seen the second round of submission of NDCs, which ended recently in 2020. So what the article here, 4.3, and I would like to highlight here, just for us to understand, so that when we are participating in any discussion, especially at the national level with regards to formulation of NDCs, we will know what questions to ask and we will know how we can push our leaders to really enhance their ambitions. So the second, Article 4.3 actually indicates that if, for instance, your earlier NDCs commits to reduce its, the country's earlier NDCs commits to reduce its emissions by 5%, then the subsequent one should be more than the earlier one. So this is basically what this article is saying, Article 4.3 of the Paris Agreement. Now, the other point that I would like to highlight is that the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities has also reflected in the Paris Agreement, because as I mentioned earlier, any agreement that has to be adopted has to be aligned with the convention, and the convention serves as the mother of any legal agreement or any legal document that will come out from the negotiations. So here we have this article, which is 4.4, actually requires developed country parties to continue to take lead in undertaking economy-wide absolute emissions reductions. And you can see here that developing country parties should continue enhancing their emissions efforts and are encouraged to move over time towards economy-wide reduction or limitation targets. So what it means here is that, yes, developed country parties, as the convention has stated, as the Kyoto Protocol enjoy them to do, the Paris Agreement still says that the developed country parties, because of the historical emissions that we have seen, they have to take lead in the emission reduction, and then developing country parties should follow. So all countries will have NDCs, but the NDCs of developed country parties will be economy-wide. That is just the difference between that of the developing countries. And then again, Article 4.9 says that each party shall communicate nationally determined contribution every 5 years. I mentioned that NDCs are submitted every 5 years. So NDCs that were submitted after the Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015 started the implementation in 2020. And likewise, the NDCs that have just been submitted would also start their implementation after by 2025. So you submit the NDCs and it takes about 5 years before you can actually start implementing the NDCs. And then we go further to Article 4.11, which says that a party may at any point adjust its existing nationally determined contribution with a view to enhance its level of ambition. So what it means is that during the implementation phase, at any point, any party can decide that I want to change my national NDCs, and any change of that kind should be towards enhancing your ambition. So you cannot change your NDCs by reducing your ambition, but rather to enhance the ambition. So the Paris Agreement provides for, allows for parties to change their NDCs at any point in time. Now I'm going to quickly go through the journey from Paris to Glasgow, what has happened so far. And before I continue, I would like to just share with you that when you look at the history, especially you look at the Kyoto Protocol, which was the first agreement that was adopted in 1997, it took almost about 7 years or so before it was ratified and entered into force, because it was adopted in 1997 and it entered into force in 2005. But when you look at the Paris Agreement, which was the second document or the second agreement to be adopted, it was ratified so fast. And this is quite good because it means that over the past years, countries or parties have come to realize the need for action and the need to address climate change. So the Paris Agreement was adopted, as we know, in 2015, and by 1 year, by November 2016, it has already been ratified by parties, so it has achieved its ratification level. So this was so fast, and many parties or the international community did not really realize that the ratification of the Paris Agreement would happen so fast. So you could see that the implementation of those NDCs, instead of perhaps beginning so soon, it was targeted to begin from 2020, with the idea that even if it takes like 4 years before parties would, or 5 years before parties would ratify the agreement, it will coincide with the 2020 target or 2020 timing for all parties to start implementing their NDCs. But it didn't happen, so the ratification happened so fast. So it took quite a number of years that from 2015 to 2020 before the implementation phase started. And then again, I would like to also mention that once the Paris Agreement was adopted, it didn't end there. There were still a lot of guidelines. Parties at that point did not really understand how they were going to really parties were still formulating their NDCs, and they needed a lot of guidelines on how those NDCs would look like, and how they can ensure that they have achieved the highest level of ambition as possible. So we have what we call the Paris Rulebook. And the Paris Rulebook basically is like a set of rules that would guide parties on how they can implement the Paris Agreement. So I'm going to share with you some of these rules or regulations or guidelines that relate to NDCs formulation and then implementation. And the first one that I would want to share with you is the guidelines to facilitate clarity, transparency, and understanding. For example, if every party is developing their NDCs, there should be some level of coherence. And this level of coherence is important for tracking of progress, the collective progress of all parties. And therefore, this guideline, as you see here, Article 4.3 of the Paris Agreement provides for countries when communicating their NDCs to provide information necessary for clarity, transparency, and understanding. So this guideline was negotiated and was finally adopted at COP24. I have attached a link to the guideline here. This is important because as young people, as members of the civil society organizations, we have to have at least some level of knowledge on some of these guidelines, so that when we are participating in any form of workshop, especially at the national level in terms of the formulation of NDCs, we know what questions to ask, and we know how to push our parties to really deliver on the ambition that we require. And then the second point that I would like to also highlight is that accounting guidelines. For instance, I mean, somebody would say, okay, if the NDCs are more of like a bottom-up approach, where parties can decide on what they would like to, or the level of emissions they would like to cut, then it means that, I mean, we cannot achieve ambition. And then again, the question also is that if parties provide whatever, I mean, are over ambitious, who is there to really check on those parties? So there are accounting guidelines that have been adopted that should also help parties to understand that if you put a target that you'd like to achieve, you should be accountable for that. So this accounting guideline is also attached in my presentation, and then I would encourage you to have a look at it once you get the presentation. It's very important. I mean, you don't need to really, it's not an academic document, but it's good as young people for us to have an idea of what this accounting guideline talks about. The third point that I would like to also highlight is that Article 4.2 of the Paris Agreement also observes that nationally determined contributions of parties shall be recorded in a public registry to be maintained by the Secretariat. So here, when the Paris Agreement was adopted, we had what we call the interim registry. So this is where all the NDCs of parties are recorded. So any party, I mean, I've shared a link here. So if you want to look at your country's NDC or any country's NDC, you can easily go there and then look at those NDCs. What is the important aspect I would like to highlight here is that this registry was actually negotiated so that parties understand, or parties will agree to how this registry should look at. And there were a lot of disagreements on how this registry should look at. It should appear on the website. So through Katowice to Glasgow, finally, I mean, the registry has been adopted. So we have a substantive registry where you can go and then view all the NDCs that parties have submitted. The other point that I would like to also highlight, and many of you, I believe, would have heard this issue about common time frames. This is quite a very controversial item that has really dragged within the negotiations from Katowice until Glasgow. So basically, the common time frames is really from Article 4.10, where parties agreed that they are going to have or agree to have NDCs with common time frames or NDCs with the same implementation period from the first meeting, which is from Katowice. So, but unfortunately, during Katowice, it was not agreed. And just to take you a little back, during the submissions of NDCs, because there were no guidelines, there were so many parties that have submitted the NDCs with different time frames. We have, I mean, if you can recall that within this discussion, we have parties that have submitted NDCs with 5-year common time frame, and then also other parties submitted NDCs with 10-year common time frame. So what it means is that if you submitted NDC with 5-year common time frame, it means that you are going to take 5 years to implement your NDCs. That's what just it means. If you submitted NDC with 10-year common time frame, it means that your NDC implementation period is going to be 10 years. But the challenge here is that in it will be difficult because, I mean, if parties have different time frames, I mean, it will be very difficult to measure the collective progress of all parties. So there was the wisdom that all parties will have the same level of common time frame, and that is what has been the NDC common time frames all this period. But this discussion or this negotiation has dragged until Glasgow, where it was finally agreed that parties will have NDCs with common time frame of 5 years. But this will start from 2025. So NDCs that will be submitted in 2025 will all have a time frame of 5 years, and this would really help with the with accountability and also with transparency. Now, I'll take 1 minute to just highlight on the Glasgow Climate Pact and also especially on the mitigation related items. So if you recall at Glasgow, parties, as part of the Glasgow Climate Pact, parties are expected to revisit their 2030 emissions reduction in 2022. And the reason for this is that the previous NDCs that were submitted, there has been a synthesis report and there is still a gap. What it means is that even if all those NDCs, the emissions targets that parties have agreed to commit to, even if they are able to achieve that, we will not be able to achieve the temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. So there is the need that parties that are able to revisit their NDCs are able do that and also adjust their emission targets a bit upward. And again, another highlight from the Glasgow Climate Pact is that parties did not submit their, parties who did not submit their NDCs before COP27 were encouraged to submit their second round of NDCs. And then the critical or the important highlight from the Glasgow Climate Pact is that there is the launch of a work program on mitigation, ambition, and implementation. And the reason, as I mentioned earlier, is that because we have the mitigation or the mitigation gap, there is the need for parties to accelerate action to enhance their ambitions so that we'll be able to meet that that gap in terms of achieving the temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. Okay, so this is just a slide before the last one. So I'm going to share a bit of the good practices related to the formulation and implementation of NDCs. And one important, I have been part of in my country, in Ghana, I've been part of the NDC formulation. And one thing I think is a good practice is is on effective governance, which I think is very critical. Effective governance here is for whichever institution that is leading the process to coordinate with other institutions to ensure that those institutions are part of the process to formulate the national NDCs. Once those institutions are part of it, they will definitely be part of the implementation as well. And the second point that I would like to highlight in terms of the good practices is on inclusion. We know very well that inclusion is very important. The private sector for a long time has been left out. And then the civil society, yes, we have been there. We have been really raising our voices. The academia is very important also in the formulation of the NDCs. The youth, the women, and the marginalized and vulnerable groups are all important in the formulation of NDCs. The third point is also we know we have just come out from COVID and then the economic shutdown that we have experienced. So it would be a very good practice, especially in the coming years. We've seen the submission of NDCs already, but it will be a very good practice that and parties are able to align their NDCs with economic recovery plans so that you achieve two targets. Whilst you are building back, you are also ensuring that your NDCs are implemented. Finally, which is the final slide, I'm sorry for taking so long, but this is the final slide. Now, this is just tips. I think many of these tips have been shared already by Joyce in her presentation, but just to highlight that it is very important as young people to build our capacities. As I mentioned earlier, we can actively engage and we'll be able to call our leaders into action only when we understand the issue. So we need to really take advantage of workshops, webinars like these ones to really build our capacity, as well as online resources that are available. We need to follow up on that. The second point also is on the I mean, in terms of NDC resources, Joyce has shared quite a lot of them. But there is also one on the NDC partnership, and there is a link that I have added on this slide. You can follow up. There seem to be quite a lot of things happening with youth engagement in NDC formulations. The final one is also with regards to young people being able to develop projects and initiatives in line with the priorities of their national NDCs. And that is when, I mean, you will be recognized by your country and also be able to engage in the implementation. Once they know you have initiative or you have ideas that are in line with the NDCs, definitely they would engage you. And if there is any resources, you can be able to also plug in at the national level. So I think this ends my slide, and thank you very much for your audience. I'm very happy to receive any questions for clarification. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Qasim, for a great session. I think we had, that was very insightful. We, of course, had a lot of people joining in late, and of course, you guys could not miss, I mean, you guys missed the important sections that Qasim might have had earlier on. So just to give a short summary of what he covered, of course, why Kyoto Protocol failed was one of the topics that he covered, and the key elements of NDCs. Furthermore, it also why transparency and understanding is important in creating very effective NDCs. Thanks so much, Qasim, for this great insightful session. We have a couple of questions coming in, and I've tried to answer a couple of them myself. One question from Manisha says, how to ensure that youth contributions, in NDCs. I think this is also a little extension of what Joyce and you tried to cover both in the session. Should a formal structure be put in place by governments, or should it be youth using a bottom-up approach? In my country, youth are doing many activities, but voices need to be recorded in NDCs. How can we achieve this? Qasim, we can't hear you
Yes.
here.
No, sorry, my network broke a bit. I don't know if you asked the question.
Oh, okay, no problem. You can
Very
also check it
sorry.
out in the chat. I can just go
Okay.
through the question again. So Anusha asks, in my country, youth are doing many activities, but voices are not being recorded in the NDCs. So how can we ensure that there is a formal structure we put in place for youth to be involved?
Yeah, so I think, I think this is, can you hear me? Sorry, my network keeps ringing, but I think
Yes.
this is very important questions, and I more or less, like many young people at the national level would always feel that way, where they would want to understand how they can actively engage. But from the experience from Ghana, I think we have quite a vibrant youth activists here. And I think what has been done so far is that, yes, the government, most of the time, because we are activists, would always be at the other side of it. But that should not deter us from mobilizing ourselves from the bottom up. And once we begin to mobilize ourselves, and then they would find a way of also engaging us. But we should also reach out to them, especially if we have even small activities like tree planting or awareness creation. We should reach out to them, perhaps the national focal point, to be a speaker in those events. And once they are there, they would understand what we are doing, and they would, I think something better would come out from this engagement. That's just what I would want to share on that.
Great, thank you so much, Qasim. I don't see any more questions that is being popped up in there. But if Qasim, if you're okay with sharing your details or email, or maybe your LinkedIn or other social media platform that you want to share, feel free to do that. And so that people can contact you directly. Anybody having any questions, please feel to direct it to him or us, either way.
Yes, I'm very happy to share my email. There's more discussion beyond this webinar. And sharing my email, anyone who would want to reach out to ask specific question or any guidelines, I would be happy to share with them. So I'm sharing my email right now on the chat.
Thanks so much, Qasim. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to pop in your questions here. That would be amazing. Also, we would just like to inform that all those participants who wish to get a certificate for this entire webinar series, if you attend all of the webinar series, upon special request, we might be able to issue the same. And if everybody's okay switching on their cameras again, we would like to have a photo session with Qasim as our second guest speaker.
Hello.
Hi, Yudhishthir.
Yes, I am Yudhishthir Chandra Bishar from Bangladesh. I am just 15 years old and I am working for climate change in our country, and I have a team, UNET for Climate Justice. So we are working for climate justice from 2017. So I want to say that if we support to take NDC planning in our country, then can we get support from you and I mean NDC's team?
If you would like to join the YOUNGO NDC working group, you can head on to the YOUNGO official website and you will have a list of all the working groups there, and you can feel free to join as well. Does that answer your question, Yudhishthir? I hope so. Okay. All right. Just to in the chat. And if, like we mentioned before, we will be sharing the recording. And if the speakers do not have any issues with sharing the presentation, you are more than happy to also share all the presentations. There is a form that we have put in right now in the chat. Shreya has shared this. To become a member of NDC working group of YOUNGO, please fill out that form. So let's just have a quick photo session, and if everybody can have their cameras on.
Yeah, but before that, let me just quickly answer this question. I've seen there was a question on whether there is a system of accountability set in place to ensure compliance on the NDC goals and all that. So just to answer that question, I would say yes. Within the Paris Agreement, we have what we call the Compliance Committee of the Paris Agreement, and the Compliance Committee actually is supposed to follow up on parties' NDCs and ensure that those parties the commitment that parties have, the target that parties have committed to really realize. So yes, there is the compliance committee which is responsible for that. Okay, over to you. Sorry.
Great, thank you so much, Qasim. Thank you. We'll be wrapping up the session now, and if everyone can have their cameras on, we'll have a quick picture together. Shreya, are you on it? let us know when we're ready. Shreya. Done? All right, great. Thanks so much, Shreya, for that. I think we have had a very insightful session today. I'm sorry that Joyce is not here for give us, listen to all of you and these amazing questions. But thank you so much, Qasim, for your amazing time, and for everybody who